Chapter 2 of The Master Mystery. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Master Mystery by John W. Gray and Arthur B. Reeve. Chapter 2. When Brent arrived back at the library, he had quite recovered his poise, at least to the eyes of those in the library. Zita had joined Eva with the old inventor, Davis. As Brent entered, Davis uttered an exclamation of joy at the sight of his motor. For the moment, Brent almost glowed. "Along with your invention," he beamed, as he handed the model to the old man, "I am going to release many others to the world." All this not only Locke was noting, but Zita, too, appeared to be an almost too interested listener. The others were chatting when Zita heard a noise in the hall and hurried out. She was just in time to see a rather hard-visaged man with cruel, penetrating eyes. It was Herbert Balcom, vice president of the company. Zita whispered to him a moment, and Balcom's hard face grew harder. "Go upstairs. Watch him," he ordered, passing down the hall. Balcom entered the library just as Davis was about to leave, hugging close to him his brain-child. Davis clutched it a bit closer at sight of the other partner. A glance would have been sufficient to show that Brent was secretly afraid of his partner, Balcom, and that Balcom dominated him. "Go to the gate with him, my dear," whispered Brent to his daughter, who was clinging to his arm, convinced of the goodness of her father, ignorant of the very basis on which the Brent and Balcom fortune rested. Balcom's mouth tightened as he came closer to Brent, menacing, the moment they were alone. "How long has this double-crossing been going on?" sneered Balcom, jerking his head toward the door through which Eva had just gone with the inventor, and shoving his face close to Brent's. "It's not double-crossing, Balcom," Brent attempted to conciliate. "But—" "No buts," interrupted Balcom, with deadly coldness. "Keep on, and you'll have the government down on us for violating the antitrust law. What's the matter? Have you lost your nerve?" As Balcom almost hissed the question, up in the laboratory Locke was now writing furiously in his notebook, when he was interrupted by a knock at the door. He whipped the dictograph receiver off his head and jumped to his feet, hiding all traces of the dictograph in the desk drawer. Then he moved over to the door, unlocked it, and flung it open. "Oh, I hope I haven't interrupted you in any important experiment," apologized Zita, innocently enough. "Nothing important," camouflaged Locke. Though Locke did not seem to notice it, another would have seen that Zita cared a great deal for him. "May I come in?" she asked, wheedling. "Certainly. I am charmed, I assure you." While Zita was gushingly effusive, Locke was correct and formally polite as he bowed his acquiescence. Zita felt it. For a moment she stood looking at a half-finished experiment on the laboratory table, then finally she turned to Locke with a calculated impulsiveness. "Why do you treat me so coldly," she asked, "when you know I admire your wonderful work?" "Really, Miss Dane," he apologized, "I didn't mean to be rude." Yet there was an air of constraint in his very tone. "Do you know," she flashed, "I can't help feeling that you are so brilliant. You must be something more than you seem." Locke suppressed a quick look of surprise. Was she trying to worm some secret from him? He masked his face cleverly. "Indeed, you must be imagining things," he replied quietly, turning and strolling toward the window of his laboratory. The moment his back was turned, Zita picked up the photograph of Eva on the desk. For a moment she stood glaring at it jealously. Out of the window Locke smiled. For down on the gravel path walking slowly toward the gate to the Brent Rock grounds, he could see Eva and Davis. The smile faded into a scowl. He had seen a young man enter the gate. It was Paul Balcom, son of Herbert Balcom, and Paul was engaged to Eva, thus giving Balcom a stronger hold over Brent. Locke knew enough about Paul to dislike him thoroughly and to distrust him. Had Locke been able to see over the hedge, he would have confirmed his suspicions. For Paul had actually driven up to Brent Rock in the runabout of as notorious a woman as could have been found in the night life of the city, one known as Deluxe Dora in the unsavory half-world in which both were leaders. Had his dictograph been extended to the hedge, he would have heard her voice rasp at Paul. "Your father may make you pay attention to this girl, Paul, but remember, you had not better double-cross me." Paul's protestations of underworld fidelity would have added to Locke's fury. However, Locke had not seen or heard. Still, it was unbearable that this fellow Paul should be engaged to a girl like Eva. Tall, dark, handsome though he was, Locke knew him to be a man not to be trusted. Paul hurried up to Eva, not a bit disconcerted at the near discovery of his intimacy with Dora. And whatever one may believe about woman's intuition, there must have been something in it, for even at a distance one could see that Eva mistrusted Paul Balcom, her fiancé. Locke scowled blackly. Paul thrust himself almost rudely between Davis and Eva. Again Davis shrank, as he had from the young man's father, then bowed, excused himself, and hurried off, hugging his motor to him, while Paul took Eva's hand, which she was not any too willing to give him. Locke watched, motionless, as the couple turned back to the house. Somehow Eva must have felt his gaze. She turned and looked upward at the laboratory window. As she saw Locke, her face broke into a smile, and she waved her hand gaily. Paul saw it, and a swift flush of anger crossed his face. He pulled Eva abruptly by the arm. "Let's go into the house," he said, almost angrily. Seeing the action, Locke also turned from the window to encounter Zita, still watching. Without a word, he left the laboratory. While this little quadrangle of conflicting emotions of Locke, Eva, Paul, and Zita was being enacted, the two partners in the library were disputing hot and heavy. As they argued, almost it seemed as if Balcom's very face lined his thoughts, that he desired Brent out of the way, as a weakling in whom he had discovered some traces of conscience, which, to Balcom, meant weakness. Balcom leaned forward excitedly. "I do not intend to let you wreck this company because your conscience, as you call it, has begun to trouble you," he hissed. Brent's hand clutched nervously. He was afraid of Balcom, so much so that he fought back only weakly. Locke was down in the hallway just in time to meet Eva and Paul as they entered. "Oh, do you know, I'm so glad. I think my father is the most kind-hearted of men," Eva trilled to Locke, as she recounted what had happened in the library with Davis. Locke listened with restrained admiration for the girl, whatever might have been his secret opinion of her father or of the story he already knew. On his part, Paul did not relish the situation, nor did he take any pains to conceal it. He shrugged and turned away. "Come," he said, with a tone of surly authority. "I think I hear my father in the library." Eva looked back swiftly at Locke and smiled as Paul led her toward the library door. But that also made Paul more furious. "Why do you make me ridiculous before that fellow?" he demanded. "I'm sorry," replied Eva, in surprise. "I didn't mean to do that." Vaguely, Paul understood. The girl was too unsophisticated to have meant it. Somehow that made it worse. Though she did not know it, he did. Unknown to herself, there was a response in the presence of Locke which was not inspired in his own society. He hurried her into the library. It was as though the entrance of Paul and Eva had been preconcerted. The partners, in their dispute, stopped and turned as the young people entered and moved over to a divan. Balcom lowered his voice and plucked at Brent's sleeve as he nodded toward the couple. "I could trust you better if they were married within a week," suggested Balcom. Brent recoiled, but Balcom affected not to notice. "Then I will believe that you are dealing fairly with me," he emphasized. Brent studied a moment, then nodded assent. Balcom extended a cold, commanding hand, and the partners shook hands. Outside, Locke had paused, about to enter the library. The pause had been just long enough for him to hear, and it was a blow to him. He watched, dazed, as the two older men walked over to the younger couple. Then he hurried away, heartsick. "My dear," began Brent, as he patted the shoulder of the girl, the one spot of goodness that had shone in the otherwise blackness of his life, making him at last realize the depth to which lust of money had made him sink. "We were just saying that perhaps it would be advisable to hasten your marriage to Paul. Say, perhaps next week?" The words seemed to stick in his throat. As for Eva, she felt a shiver pass over her. Without knowing why, she drew back from Paul, at her side, shrank even closer to her father, trying not to tremble. Did Paul realize it? Brent felt the shudder with a pang. He leaned over. "Promise to do this, for my sake," he whispered, so low that there was no chance of the others hearing. "By tomorrow all may be changed." There was something ominous about the very words. End of chapter 2. Recording by Roger Moline.